Brought to you by The Real Story with Jeannie Ives. Powered by Breakthrough Ideas. Sunday evening at 7 on AM 560, The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Here's a novel approach that the Department of Justice is undertaking in the direction of alleged institutions of higher learning that are platforming anti-Semitism and all kinds of barbarism on the college campus. On May 19th, Todd Blanche, the Deputy AG, issued a memorandum announcing the administration would begin employing the False Claims Act to investigate those who defraud the United States by taking its money while knowingly violating civil rights laws and falsely certifying compliance with such laws. These it's a key TAM action for those steeped in the law. Accordingly, a university that accepts federal funds could violate the False Claims Act when it encourages anti-Semitism, refuses to protect Jewish students, allows men to intrude into women's bathrooms, or requires women to compete against men in athletic competitions. Colleges and universities cannot accept federal funds while discriminating against their students. The False Claims Act is also implicated whenever federal funding recipients or contractors certify compliance with civil rights laws while knowingly engaging in racist preferences, mandates, policies, programs, and activities, including through DEI. Pam Bondi, the department strongly encourages anyone with knowledge of discrimination by federal funding recipients to consider filing a key TAM action under the False Claims Act. I wonder if this is consistent with what former Harvard Professor Emeritus Alan Dershowitz is discussing in his new book, The Preventive State, The Challenge of Preventing Serious Harms While Preserving Essential Liberties. He's calling for a new jurisprudence in this area. Professor Dershowitz, Emeritus Professor of Law, Harvard Law, his podcast is The Dersh Show, which can be found on Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes. And again, from the prolific Professor Dershowitz, The Preventive State is his new offering. Professor Dershowitz, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks. This is my 57th book. I'm now working on my 58th, which is very, very relative to what you were talking about a minute ago. It's called Trump to Harvard, Go Fund Yourself. And it's all about
that is the perfect title.
Funding. Yeah. And Harvard's response is sue you.
Right.
But we'll see. We'll see. Look, there's a lot of fraud going on. Look at what happened at MIT last week. A woman was selected, the president of the student body, to give the graduation speech. She submitted the speech in advance and was picked based on the speech. And then she pulled a bait and switch. And she spent her whole speech attacking Jews, Israel, Zionism, etc., and defrauded the university. They prevented her from coming to graduation the next day, but they should have withheld her degree. She engaged in fraud. People go to jail for that. It's called bait and switch. And so I understand the administration using this bait and switch rationale. Same thing happened at Harvard, where a student presented a speech, and at NYU, students presented a speech and then were allowed to speak and then gave a completely different speech. That's not First Amendment protected. It's protected to give whatever speech you want as long as you're honest about it. But if you're playing bait and switch, by getting federal funding, those are very interesting issues, and I'm glad to see that the administration is pursuing them as long as they do it consistent with civil liberties. The thesis of my book is Benjamin Franklin, who said those who would give up essential liberties for a little bit of security deserve neither. But it's perfectly okay to give up a little bit of liberty, unessential liberty, in order to achieve maximum security. If we could have prevented 9/11 by arresting 10 people, 3 of whom mistakenly, or if Israel could have prevented October 7th by bombing a Hamas target preventively, I think a lot of people would have agreed with that. So prevention is essential at a time when we have threats of cataclysmic dangers. On the other hand, preserving civil liberties is essential too. and we have to strike the appropriate balance.
Well, I mean, just sticking on the higher education issue for a minute in Harvard, the president there, Alan Garber, and he's not the only one making this argument, essentially concedes that there's an anti-Semitism problem on campus. However, that a problem should not in any way endanger federal funding for important research and underwriting of student loans and so on and so forth, that the two should be completely disconnected. And this is what other university presidents are arguing as well. What do you say in response to that?
Well, I think we need targeted defunding. And in my book, I call for targeted defunding. You defund the areas that are causing these problems, but sometimes they're general. Look, Alan Garber's a wonderful man. I've known him for years. But he approved an honorary degree. Only 6 honorary degrees were given by Harvard at graduation. One of them to a woman from California who had called for an academic boycott against Jews who support Israelis, and she would prevent research. She would prevent Israeli Jewish scientists from working with American scientists to cure cancer. So, and she got an honorary degree from Alan Garber and from the Harvard Corporation. So the problem goes beyond the Divinity School, which is a cesspool of anti-Semitism, the Public Health School, which is a garbage dump of anti-Semitism, the Carr Center for Human Rights at the Kennedy School, which is also a terrible place for anti-Semitism. And it sometimes applies to the entire universities. And so the university has to get a little bit of a kick in the rear end, but I don't want to see cancer research in any way influenced. I also don't want to see visas denied to students who would not do anything wrong. We have to have targeted visa denials. That's the thesis of the book. Get targeted, get specific, focus on the evils, not on the goods that universities are doing. And, you know, the universities can copy a lot from good universities. University of Chicago has done a very, very a good job. Vanderbilt University has done a good job. Emory University. There are universities that have really taken on this issue and without denying anybody their free speech rights have created atmospheres where anti-Semitism is not tolerated. Look, the greatest human rights struggle today in the world, is not the rights of black people, not the rights of gay people, not the rights of women. Those are all in the right directory. They're all moving in the right direction toward rights and liberty and equality. The greatest human rights problem in the world today is the attack on Jews, Zionists, and Israel, the double standard. And if human rights people ignore that problem, they're ignoring the main problem of human rights the way they did in the 1930s in Germany.
I mean, obviously, the anti-Semitism on university campuses, we're talking about it all the time, but do you see a direct link between academic rhetoric and attacks like the one that happened in Boulder? Or do you blame progressive Democrats maybe encouraged him?
I have evidence of it. Okay. I was one of the primary defenders of protesters during the Vietnam War. I represented a lot of protesters, including violent protesters, at the Chicago Democratic Convention. And with my own eyes, I saw some of these protesters who started by engaging in destructive violence become murderers. Kathy Boudin killed a policeman.
Yeah.
She planted bombs and blew up her house on 11th Street. The weathermen. I saw a trajectory, and the weathermen, a lot of them were from Chicago, and I saw a definite correlation between violent demonstrations against the Vietnam War and moving to the next step and picking up a bomb or picking up a gun and shooting and killing people. And I think we're going to see more of that. I got an honorary degree the day after the events in D.C. where 2 people were killed. And so the security people at the university that gave me the honorary degree had to come over to me and tell me they're worried for my life. They're worried about a copycat offense because I'm a prominent pro-Israel defender. And so they had to come up with a plan for my protection, including policemen with machine guns and policemen with unbreakable glass, bulletproof glass, protecting me. And so I think we're going to see more of this, and I think there's a correlation between that And the rhetoric we're hearing, globalize the Intifada, that means kill Jews. Palestine will be free. Free of what? Free of Jews. And I think we're seeing people that people may not mean that, but that's the way it's interpreted by people who have an inclination and a predisposition toward violence.
I wanted to take up another case study in your book, The Preventive State, where you try to provide a framework for balancing this. This is particularly salient in Chicago and Illinois because of the Safety Act, our elimination of cash bail categorically. It's Chapter 3, Preventing Crime, Bail Sentencing, and Preventative Detention in your book. But, give us, at the state level, there's a lot of opposition to the Safety Act because you have people that are out on electronic monitoring or just released on their own recognizance who are committing violent crimes. And then you say, well, if we would have held them over for trial, then this preventable crime could have been prevented. And so how should we sort of think about that balance on that issue?
Yeah, this is what I've been thinking about since literally 1964. I started writing about bail, and that's what I saw as the paradigm of preventive detention. Look, too many people are held in preventive detention pre-trial who wouldn't commit crimes just because they don't have enough money to raise the bail, and too few people who are dangerous are held because they do have the money, and that's why abolishing monetary bail is a good idea because it bears no relationship or little relationship to the protection of society. But it's very, very hard to predict which people will commit the crimes while out on bail. And if a judge makes a mistake by letting somebody out wrongly and he commits a crime, that becomes a headline. If the judge, on the other hand, makes a mistake by keeping somebody in who would not commit a crime, nobody knows about that. So when in doubt, don't let them out becomes the mantra. But too many people already are let out, and too few are kept in based on what we ought to have is artificial intelligence has given us the ability to increase our predictive knowledge. And so I would hope that bail can be used more intelligently as a preventive mechanism. By the way, deportation is a preventive mechanism. It goes back to the Bible. It was called exile.
Right.
When we have people in a country who are endangering the country, we exile them, we deport them. But we have to make sure we do it in a targeted way. You know, in my book, The Preventive State, I cover everything from that to whether Israel and the United States should preemptively destroy Iran's nuclear reactor. In the 1930s, Germany was building up to becoming the worst nation in the history of the world, killing 50 million people. And Britain and France could have prevented it by attacking Germany in 1935 preventively. And Goebbels thought they would. But they didn't. If Churchill had been the prime minister in 1935, I suspect he would have done it. But instead, we had people who wanted to be conciliatory toward the Nazis, and we allowed them to pass the danger point and become the most dangerous country in the history of the world. So prevention can be small issues like bail, or can be bigger, mega issues like attacking Germany in 1935 or attacking Iran today. These are the kinds of issues that I discuss in the preventive state.
Well, sure, you want to use AI for predictive enhancement, but by the same token, you don't want to turn society into a Minority Report where you're arresting people based on what you think the crime that you think they're going to commit before they commit it.
No, I agree with you. I wrote my first articles about this way before a Minority Report came out. So I've been thinking and writing about the preventive state since the middle 1960s, and finally, at the age of 86, I finally decided to write my magnum opus, The Preventive State, which puts together all the research and thinking that I've been teaching that I was doing over the past 60 years.
But would you say some of this is just commonsensical too? Like, for example, in Illinois, just going back to this as a concrete example,
sure.
We're like we purposely blind ourselves. Judges, cannot consider prior bad acts in making a public safety determination for holding a defendant over for trial. But I mean, if you used an AI tool, or if you just had common sense, a guy that's been arrested 12 times and convicted 6 times, including for violent or violent adjacent felonies, probably is somebody you want to hold over for trial, and you don't need AI for that.
No doubt about that. The best predictor of the future is the past. And if a person has a long record of criminal conduct, that's predictive of future criminal conduct. And so it does require common sense. And in most states, you can take into account a prior record in deciding whether to keep somebody or allow somebody to go free pending trial. But in many states, all you can do is raise the bail amount. I have a case now pending somewhere in the United States where my clients were prepared to pay for their own security and make sure that they couldn't get out of their own home. But the court said, no, you can't do that because it would discriminate against the poor who don't have the facilities to protect the society. I mean, these are hard issues. These are issues we've been debating for hundreds of years. The first case I discuss in my book, The Preventive State, is the assassination attempt on the life of Andrew Jackson. And the first decision was whether to hold the person in jail pending his trial. And initially they said, no, we would let him out, even though he tried to kill the president. Ultimately, they kept him in. But we've been debating and deciding these issues now from the beginning of history. And it's about time we put it together in a book. And that's what I've done in The Preventive State.
You might want to put this in your book. I mean, we have this morning a Homer Glenn couple. They were charged with first-degree murder in the death of their 2-year-old daughter. They were charged yesterday with that. The charges were upgraded. They're out on pre-trial conditions. And they also have a 6-year-old child who's in protective custody, but they're out. They're at home.
Yeah, no, that's
Are you kidding me?
When you have situational crimes, which means crimes that are focused on particular situations like a family crime, they are less likely to be repeated than if you have people who are out there just, holding up liquor stores. So there's a lot of data on this, but, somebody who kills a 2-year-old, obviously, there's a strong case, particularly if there's another member of the family around, for not allowing them out on bail. But judges make wrong decisions all the time on both sides. Too many people are let out who should be kept in, and too many people are kept in who should be let out. And we're just doing it wrong, and we're doing it wrong militarily. We could have prevented 9/11. Israel could have prevented October 7th. They had the intelligence, but they didn't know how to use it. We could have prevented Pearl Harbor. And you know what happens? After we fail to prevent something like Pearl Harbor, we then overreact and put 110,000 Japanese Americans, many of them citizens, into detention centers needlessly. None of them would have committed crimes, but we overreact. We overreacted after 9/11. We could have prevented it. We didn't. Instead, we passed the Patriot Act, which goes much, much, much too far. So we do too little preventively and too much reactively, and that's the thesis of my book, The Preventive State. And I cover everything from COVID to, you name it, to environmental issues. We live in a time when prevention has become more important than ever, and yet it poses great danger of civil liberties when we prevent too much and we do it thoughtlessly.
He is Alan Dershowitz, Emeritus Professor of Law, Harvard. His podcast, The Dersh Show, can be found on Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes. And his new book that we've been discussing, The Preventative State, The Challenge of Preventing Serious Harms While Preserving Essential Liberties. The Preventative State. Professor Dershowitz, thank you as always.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Hear about the big stories of the day, then talk about them right here on Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer. Enjoy uninterrupted programming from Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson around the clock, all day, every day, including daily replays of Chicago's Morning Answer on Dan and Amy 24/7. Listen now at danandamy247.com.
Business owners, now's the time for your business to make the move to a locally owned business bank. Hi, Mike Gallagher here to let you know that you don't have to look far. Signature Bank was